Thank you very much for that kind introduction. What I'm going to do is to spend around half an hour, 40 minutes, talking in quite broad terms about where Google sees geography, Google sees mapping, and then a kind of few personal opinions perhaps about where the future of this technology is going, and how I think that probably, as an industry, geographers, people that know GI science, this is the best time ever in our history. We have more opportunities, more ways that we can actually change the world than ever before. So that's a really good thing to have as a statement, I suppose. That's what we can do in the future. So let's get on to the next slide. Got my windows lost, excuse me. Okay. So there's the broad statement then. The map of the future is not a map. If you're academics, you didn't have, I guess, discuss after that, but we're going to discuss that. Everything that we do at Google boils down to our mission statement, and if you dig, you probably don't have to dig very deeply on google.ca, you'll find this mission statement explained, which is to organise the world's information, make it universally accessible and useful. And that recognises the point, I think, that today information is the raw material of our age, where once upon a time economies were built on agriculture, then built on coal and iron and manufacturing. Today, what economies will be built on and are built on is exploiting information, getting access to the information that is relevant and useful at any particular point in time. And we look at that very much as an activity that's not focused really on enterprises, on companies, corporations, but actually on individuals, on users. So that mission statement is all about making the world's information universally accessible to you. You in this room, your family, your friends, and actually everybody on the planet. That's where the universally accessible bit comes in. So it's all about saying, okay, there's all these huge volumes of information, and that's increasing every day. What we have to do is to be able to identify the information that is going to be useful to an individual at any particular point in time, for whatever purpose, for whatever question they're asking, and provide that information to them. Now, from a geographical point of view, we can boil that mission statement down to something that's actually very simple, but actually something that's very powerful and very emotive. For us, making sure that you as an individual is never lost is really what we're trying to do. So you can be anywhere in the world and never be lost. To always know, one, where you are, and obviously then most importantly, what's around you. In this case, this is a street in Nairobi. And you should be able to stand on a street in Nairobi and know where your hotel is, or where you're staying, how to get to the nearest taxi, a cash machine, an ATM, whatever you need. So that you don't have that feeling of being lost. Show of hands, how many people can remember the last time they were lost? Really lost, didn't know where they were going. How did you feel? It's one of those really scary things sometimes. It can be really, really off-putting, really scary to be lost. But probably if I ask that question in 5 years' time, no one will put their hand up. Actually, you as a generation, perhaps the generation that are following you, will never feel what it is to be lost. Because they will have grown up with this technology in their pocket that lets them find out where they need to be at any particular point in time. They might think, well, that's strange, because all I ever hear in the press, and this is certainly the case in Europe, is that, oh, it's terrible, no one knows how to use maps anymore. People have lost the ability to navigate. The reality is, today, maps are more accessible than they have ever been in history. If you remember, you think about it, for the vast majority of our time on the planet, maps, the record of what's around us, was something that was protected, in many cases was secret. And even in the last 100 years, maps have always been something that only really wealthy people had access to. But now everyone has access to maps. Everyone has access to maps and they use them every day because we have maps on our local devices like this, on our mobile phones. And that makes a big difference. Maps are truly part of our daily lives. They're things that we use every day in getting to work, commuting, finding a bar that someone said they're going to meet up at, choosing a restaurant when we're on vacation, picking a hotel to stay at, just finding out what's around. It's something that we use every day. Again, show of hands, who used a map today? Okay, very good, not bad. Who used a map in the last week? Okay, who used Apple Maps in the last week? Oh, come on, I look at the statistics, I know some of you did. Okay, I could make that joke that those of you who did use Apple Maps are lost on their way and we'll see them eventually. No, I won't. Actually, Apple Maps is not that bad. Yes. It goes to Steve Jobs there, isn't it? Right. Oh, sorry, is that not politically correct? Okay. There we go. Now, we take it for granted that we're going to be able to see maps that look like this. This is where I live. This is London. And, you know, as you'd expect, downtown Hamilton or downtown Toronto, you'll see a very detailed map like this, and clearly there's an expectation that you'll have, you know, the sites of every street, and you'll have, in this case, subway stations and, you know, restaurants, bars. It's all going to be there. No great checks. For us, though, just being able to make sure that we can provide mapping for London and New York and Toronto and Hamilton isn't enough. We want to be able to provide that level of detail if you're also a resident of this place. This is Windhoek, the capital of Namibia. You should have that same level of detail, that same access to the technology. Remember that universal part in the mission statement. Or, if you're here, this is Manaus in Brazil. In the summer, England, do you remember the Football World Cup? England played 2 games in Manaus. That was their whole World Cup experience. So for most England players, this is all they ever saw of Brazil. But I thought I'd put that map up just to, I don't know, why did I put that map up? It's quite a sad map in many ways, but there you go, Manaus. Again, in Brazil, perhaps there's an expectation that that level of mapping will be available. But what about here? This is Tuvalu. Tuvalu is a very small Pacific island and is probably going to be the first country in history that will disappear as a result of climate change. It's a very small country, about 230th out of the sort of 250 countries. 5 meters above sea level. So you can see as sea level changes, it's going to have a huge impact on this island. So you can see it's tiny. It's basically a runway and a few streets. But it is nevertheless a country. Gains quite a lot of its income from its domain name, .tv, which is quite a good domain name to have. So we have that level of detail of mapping. It doesn't look that impressive because there isn't really very much there. But it's important just to have that same quality of mapping. Now, in terms of mapping, where we've come from historically on online mapping is we based most of our online maps on the content that came from traditional street atlases and the data that went into satellite navigation systems. It was the same basic content, which was okay. And in the early days of online mapping, that was fine, because that was all the content that was really there, and that was people's expectation was set at that sort of level of content. It ended up, though, emphasizing streets and driving as a kind of major design element to maps, which isn't necessarily a good thing. And we thought, okay, well, there's lots of other information we can start adding to our maps to provide more context. Talking to the guys earlier about this idea of sense of place. Just looking at a street map, you don't really get a sense of what a place is like. You know, I showed you those maps of Windhoek in London and Manaus, and they all, you know, to be honest, they all look very similar. But actually, they're clearly very different places. They would feel very different if you were there. So how do you get that more qualitative information as part of that mapping experience? Well, you do that by adding other types of information. The first thing we all ran off and started doing, ourselves and Bing and Yahoo and everybody else, was to start looking at satellite imagery. Or, as in most cases, in most parts of the world, actually aerial photography. But it gives you a sense here now of Tuvalu, actually how Tuvalu is very different to Hamilton. You know, here we have the archetypal desert island. You know, white coral beaches. Actually, it's very little of kind of developed land there. Actually, not a huge amount of vegetation. The runway there is that dominant feature. With an image, you suddenly get much more qualitative knowledge, sense of what the place is like. The real rich seam of qualitative information comes from terrestrial imagery. This is where we spend so much of our time and effort capturing street view, because street view is that final level of zoom. It takes you down to standing on a street corner and then really experiencing what a place is like. So here you can see standing on a pier in Tuvalu, you get a sense of really what the place is like. Not super wealthy, you know, we're not talking here about, you know, a rich Caribbean island that, you know, lots of tax exiles live in. This is not what Tuvalu is about. And of course, what really changed was the fact that now maps can be interactive. We can start to identify other information that we wouldn't necessarily display on the map, but we can have appear when we ask for a particular question. So in this case, this is the one hotel in Tuvalu. We can identify that on the map, tells us a little bit of information about it. We can also get to read the review. Fortunately, it's okay. You know, imagine if it was a really terrible hotel, being the only hotel in Tuvalu. But we can start to get this, again, more qualitative information about this particular place. And we can then start to search around it. Now, traditionally, when you start searching for, I suppose, what we term in sort of GIS terms, attribute data, for the world, you would have gone and you would have looked in things like telephone directories. Anybody remember a telephone directory? Yeah. They were these kind of big books that used to be delivered, like mail, outside your house. And it would contain a list of telephone numbers. I'm sorry I have to describe it, because some people have never seen a telephone directory. Or you might have had guidebooks, you know, with really cheesy people on the cover telling you about Toronto's best restaurants. This was how you found that other sort of information that you might have, you know, if you were kind of planning a night out or you wanted to find the telephone number of your local vet. Of course, this less so, but these things are now extinct. We go onto the internet if we want to find out addresses and telephone numbers and so on. So those addresses, those telephone numbers are that kind of other information that now appears on our map, and we can search nearby. So in this case, I want to, you know, find restaurants that are nearby to this hotel, and you know, there is a restaurant that's nearby, the JR Ocean Hotel, a JR Ocean restaurant. If I want to get there, I get driving directions. Now, these driving directions, believe it or not, are being provided to you in real time based on the local traffic conditions. Now, to be honest, there's not much traffic congestion in Tuvalu. You know, it doesn't really make much difference which road you take. It's not a lot of traffic. Obviously, if you were driving from Toronto to Hamilton, it will be very different. You'd have all sorts of different routes, different traffic conditions, and so on. That information is actually coming from anonymously tracking people's mobile phones. You know, when you sign up for your Android device or you use the Google app on iOS, you, if you choose to, contribute your location and your speed anonymously so that we can provide real-time traffic information to people. So we don't have to put any sensors in the road or anything. We use people's mobile phones to do that. Okay, so it's going to take me whichever way I like, 2 minutes to drive from the hotel to the restaurant. Great. And when I get to the restaurant, what I do, it's got a flaky internet connection, but I won't show this, but I show my favourite YouTube video. I don't know how many people have seen this YouTube video. It's like what the internet was designed for, okay? So it's a cat, obviously, wearing a shark costume, riding a robotic vacuum cleaner. That's what the internet is designed for, yeah? Absolutely. If you haven't seen that, search for cat riding a robotic vacuum cleaner, wearing a shark costume, and you will find it. Great way to keep her entertained.
So here I am in this bar in Tuvalu, wanting to show this video to the other people in the bar, and fortunately the bar has a projector. Unfortunately, I have a MacBook, and I've forgotten my dongle. I nearly forgot my dongle. Here, I forgot my dongle, which is the nightmare of all MacBook owners. If you forget your dongle, you can't plug into the projector because we've got a little micro display, all projectors are VGA. Terrible. So what am I going to do? I'm really keen on showing this video of the cat wearing the shark costume. So I'd better go online, it's got an internet connection, find out where the nearest Apple store is to buy one of these dongles. Turns out the nearest Apple store to Tuvalu is in Hawaii. Bummer. But, not impossible to get there. Typing in the instructions, so from that particular hotel in Tuvalu to the Apple store in Hawaii, in Honolulu, it's going to take me 18 hours to get there. But it's a good video, it's a really good video. This is how I'm going to get there. Lots of changes of flight, island hopping to get me to Honolulu, but it's worth it. And when I get to Honolulu Airport, it's okay, I don't need to hire a car because there's actually a really good bus service between the airport and the shopping mall. And look, it's only going to cost $2. Well, that's a bargain. Definitely worth making the trip to get the dongle then. When I get to the airport, I can pull out my phone, and my phone will give me the interior of the airport in Honolulu, will tell me where I need to go to get to the cash point to get some money out to pay for my bus fare. When I'm riding along on the bus, I can see where I'm going, the route, and when I get to the shopping mall, I can get the directions directly to the Apple store and to get my dongle. So there I have proved, okay, admittedly it's a kind of an extreme day, but here I am in my normal day just using maps as part of what I do. But it's more than just a map, isn't it? It's searching for businesses, it's getting access to aircraft flight timetables, bus timetables, lots more than just the simple map. That's why maps have become so valuable and so useful to us, in that they are a natural gateway into the other sorts of information that we need to find. It's one way of getting access to that information. Okay, so here's where we start to get interesting then. Because we're pretty good now, we think. We use maps all the time, there's a great way to the internet, fantastic. Where are we going to go next? Well, where we're going to go next is probably going to go beyond what we currently perceive maps to be. Still powered by geographic information, geospatial data, processes and models, but perhaps moving beyond the constraints of what traditionally we thought a map was. The reason that we've kind of got to this point is illustrated by this slide. This is Google Maps of about 2 years ago, of the area I live in, southwest London, part of London called Teddington, near the River Thames. And this is a map showing you geocoded photos, it's showing you speeds of roads, it's showing you information about restaurants. It's just full of stuff and very hard to interact with. There's way too much content there, and we're still not showing all the potential content, all the information that we could potentially show. We've got to the point where we literally have too much information to fit on the screen. Now, those of you who've ever done any cartography or any philosophy will know Borges, and Borges is kind of philosophical discussion of this idea of the one-to-one map. So he was discussing that, if cartographers continue to work hard at creating more and more detailed, larger and larger scale maps, eventually, theoretically, philosophically, you reach the point where you have a map that's one-to-one scale. But of course, then that's useless because that's reality. You can't carry reality around with you. That was his point. Actually, we've probably got to the point now where we've gone beyond the one-to-one scale map. We have far more information about the reality around us than we can actually see. So, how do we then break that conundrum where we have so much information? How do we display it? Well, as cartographers, we should know what we have to do.
For cartography, the most important principle is it's not what you add, but what you take away that is important. Every good map that has ever been created is an abstraction of reality. We throw away things that we're not interested in, that aren't relevant to the point, to the message that we're trying to communicate with a map. Because, as we know, every map tells a story. It communicates a message that the cartographer, the designer, wanted to communicate. And it means we may well have made quite big design choices in other areas to remove that. Now, we're all familiar with the Mercator projection and how much bad press the Mercator projection gets. Mercator didn't design it to upset liberals in America because it distorted the size of Africa. He designed the projection so you could use it for navigating. But the bearing on a Mercator projection map would be the true bearing that you would take. So every map is an abstraction, is a simplification of reality that removes detail, removes features. The classic example of a well-designed map, I love this, is the London Tube map. You've probably all seen the London Tube map. You can buy t-shirts, you can buy tea towels, all sorts of stuff with a tube map on. This was the original design concept that Harry Beck, the creator of the map, sketched one evening. He wasn't actually employed to make a new map. He did it almost as a hobby. And the great truth that we as cartographers, that we as GI scientists should all be slightly embarrassed by is that Harry Beck wasn't a geographer, he was an electrical engineer. So he used the principles of designing a circuit to use to design a map. But the great thing about this was he took reality and threw it out the window. He said, I'm not interested in the actual scale of this map. What I'm interested in is the topology. Where is one station connected to another station? Their relative locations, not their absolute locations. Okay, so let's go back to proper design principles then for cartography. What can we do to make our maps simpler? So about 18 months ago, we went through the process and we reinvented Google Maps. And we could do that because there were some technological changes that were coming in, particularly in browser technology, in terms of HTML5 and this thing called WebGL, that allows you to have very high performance graphics rendering in a browser. So it means your browser is as powerful in many ways as a piece of desktop GIS software. It has the same horsepower as ArcGIS does in terms of drawing graphics on the screen. So what can we do with that capability to start thinking about cartography differently? Also, at the same time, we recognise this change in that most people now access their maps on mobile devices, on their phones and on their tablets, more so than on the desktop. So Google Maps now on the web is based upon the design principles that we use for mobile devices. And what we did with mobile devices a few years ago was to say, rather than traditionally rendering raster data, those of you from the GIS background will be familiar with that idea, we'll take vector data and we'll render the vector data in the client. That's what we used to do on the mobile. When we moved over to the new version of Google Maps, we take the vector data and we render that vector data in the browser. And that allows us to do all sorts of tricks with that vector data in the browser to render that same content differently. And let me show you a very simple example. So here's the old version of Google Maps. And what we're interested in, obviously, is this place in the middle called Pullins Gardens. It's a small kind of urban park in London that you might visit for a picnic. That's how it used to be displayed. You had the basic map and we just stuck a pin on Pullins Gardens. That's where you need to go. What we do now in the new version of Google Maps is we actually change the underlying cartography. We say, okay, this is a map about Pullins Gardens. Pullins Gardens is the important feature on this map. We need that to be highlighted and everything else to be de-emphasised. And if you can see, it's quite subtle, but the roads that you might use to travel to Pullins Gardens, they've been emphasised, they're highlighted. All the other roads that actually aren't particularly relevant have been faded into the background. And that's all happening in the browser. The same vector data is being sent, but the rules in terms of how to render that are also sent, and it appears slightly differently. You're familiar with that map pin. Actually, what we wanted to do was to get rid of the map pin. We wanted to make the map itself the interface, not to have a map that was then splattered with loads and loads of pins, each one of those pins having equal value, each one not particularly emphasizing any particular point, but to say, no, this is a map of a series of restaurants or hotels or bars. Let's change that map and how the underlying cartography works to display those hotels with some more meaning. So here we are. This is part of Sydney, Australia, called Oxford Street. It's kind of where you go for bars and restaurants. That's how it used to be, all those familiar map pins. And if you remember, off the side somewhere, there'd be a list, A to H, of all the different points that you were seeing. A lot of information that's separated from attributes, pins somewhere else. The new version were much more sophisticated. Now we use different types of icons to represent bars and restaurants. We actually have the name of the bar or restaurant and some snippets, some text to tell you about what's going to go on there. And we can change the size of those icons to rank those in an order of relevance or importance to you. So although it's a simpler map, actually it contains much more information than the old map with the pins did. And when it comes to displaying the attributes, this is kind of the full screen view of Google Maps you'll be familiar with. As you'll know, when you click on a particular bar, down pops this kind of standard display that tells you about that particular bar. You click off the screen, that disappears again. And we've got all of the contents there in terms of street view imagery, interior images, reviews from me and my friends, everything I need to know about that particular location displayed consistently, not using up lots of screen real estate. And again, maybe you can see that if I go back. Watch how the map itself changes when I click on a particular, in this case, pub. So there it is, no pub selected. When I click on that pub, you see the other streets fade out, the pub, the street that it's on is highlighted. The map is unique for that particular pub. Subtle but important, I think. Okay, so that's kind of changing cartography as we traditionally looked at it from the point of view of online mapping. And if you think about it, what I've just shown you actually means that when you generate a map now on Google Maps, no two maps that we create are the same. Every map is unique. Every map will be unique to the purpose for that map's existence. Is it a map for that particular bar, directions to a particular airport, and so on. That was a big shift in technical capability to say we're going to generate 1 billion maps a month and each one of those maps is going to be different. That was a big shift in thinking. But what if you go the next step and say, okay, we've got all of this really rich content about everything that's around us in the world. There might be sometimes when a map actually isn't the best way of displaying that information. Maps are good for that synoptic view when we want to see lots of things. But if I have a very much more focused requirement, a question to ask, maybe the map's not the best way. Part of this was driven by the development of this kind of wearable technology. This is Google Glass. And Google Glass has access to all of that, apps on Google Glass has access to all of that same content that we have on Google Maps, but we choose to display it differently. So here I am, this is my street in London, this is where I spend most of my time. If I wanted to get, say, directions to my local shopping centre, not that I need directions to my local shopping centre, but as an example, this is what I'd see. A very kind of abstract, high-level representation of the route from my current location to the shops. It says, okay, what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to walk for a few minutes and then you're going to get the train. So that's what that kind of bar at the top kind of street map-like, kind of tube map-like tells me. And it tells me, okay, given that I'm leaving at this particular point in the afternoon, this is how long it's going to take, based on the real-time traffic or the real-time train timetable. It's going to be a train along in a minute. Okay, I can see that as a map, and we have that kind of highlighted view displayed in my eye line, but actually, when you're walking along, that's too much content to take in. You don't need that. What you actually need are the step-by-step instructions. So as you're going along, you're given, okay, turn left, turn right, as you move around. So it's the same content, but abstracted even more to display on these different types of devices. This is my favourite pub. It's just on the banks of the River Thames. And if I wanted to tell you how to get there, maybe you'd be having that sort of content coming up on your smartwatch. Now, your smartwatch, something that you'll carry around with you all the time, and the primary interface to using your smartwatch actually is voice. So you end up talking to your watch all the time. So you can say, okay, I want to walk to the Anglers pub, and it will connect via Bluetooth to your mobile phone and say, okay, from your current location, it's going to take you 10 minutes, it's going to be half a mile to walk there, and here are the instructions. Very simple instructions, because you're just going to look at that. But rather than walking along like this, because you look like a bit of an idiot doing that, actually what happens, as you're walking along, there's a haptic sensor in the watch. So when it's a point that there's some new instructions for you, your watch vibrates. So you then look at your watch, and it gives you the next instruction, what to do next. So in this case, okay, turn here, right onto the high street. Again, the same information, but in a much more abstract way of representing it. And this, I think, is going to be a real opportunity for you guys, and if you're interested in research and in development around new applications, you want to be an entrepreneur perhaps, how do you make use of all of this really rich geospatial content and deliver it to these very simple devices in ways beyond the traditional map? Because a traditional map like that actually doesn't really work that well on a mobile device like that. Okay, computer. How many people remember this film? Or have probably seen it on the TV because it's been repeated so many times. This was, I can't remember which Star Trek movie it was. Star Trek 4? 3? 4? 4. It was the one where they went back in time to rescue a whale in San Francisco Harbour. Let me see if I can get this to work on my phone. I'm going to have to switch off Wi-Fi because Wi-Fi is a bit flaky. Let's see what happens. But anyway, what happens, we go back in time, back in history, and there's Scotty with, I think, probably the then quite new Macintosh computer. And there is Scotty talking into the mouse of the Macintosh computer, saying, okay, computer, trying to get it to do something, because obviously that's how you interact with a computer in Star Trek. Let me see if I can do this on my computer, because now, actually, the way we interact, and I think we will increasingly interact with our computers, is by talking to them. Now, if I can get a reasonable network connection, maybe this will work. Okay, Google, who is Winston Churchill? Sounds quite accurate, doesn't it? Okay, Google, who was his wife?
His spouse is Clementine Churchill from 1908 to 1965.
See what I did there? I asked who was his wife, and it understood the context of the question. Okay, Google, where was he born?
Winston Churchill was born in Blenheim Palace, Woodstock.
Okay, Google, will it rain there tomorrow?
Yes, the forecast for tomorrow in Blenheim Palace, Woodstock, United Kingdom is 12 degrees with a chance of rain.
Pretty impressive? Yeah? Cool? Come on, that's really cool. Yeah. So, think what's going on behind the scenes there is I'm asking a series of questions in, not particular computer speak, and it's being able to answer those because it understands the context, it understands the semantics of the underlying data. It understands the idea of a person, that the person could be married to someone, that the person can be born somewhere. A where is a place that can have attributes associated with it, like the weather. Actually, behind the scenes there, a lot of that semantics that makes that kind of conversational search work is based on geospatial data. Saying, okay, Blenheim Palace is a place. The place is somewhere in England, and yes, it's going to rain tomorrow. Surprise, surprise. Of course, they could have been completely canned. Yes, it's going to rain tomorrow. Okay. Now, a lot of that context, a lot of that semantics comes from actually knowing a little bit more about the user. And this is where we get into the area that, we have to be quite clear and transparent with you guys. If you choose to log in to Google, if you've got a Gmail account or a Google account, and you log in, we start recording and understanding information about you. We'll understand where you live, where you work, your preferences for when you choose to travel, whether you prefer public transport, you drive, you cycle, and so on. We use all that information behind the scenes to provide you with more contextually relevant information. Here's the important message though. That's all really good, and that's going to get better and better and better as time goes on. If you don't want to log in, you don't have to. Most, if not all, the services will continue to work, but they won't work as well, because we won't know as much about you. I can't say, okay Google, will it rain tomorrow at home? Yes, it is going to rain tomorrow at home. Typical. But it wouldn't know where home was if it didn't know me and I wasn't logged in. Okay, so if we have a bit more context, we can start to do things like this. This is Google Now, and this is something that you get on your Android phone by default. If you download the Google Search app on iOS, this is what you get. This is on the iPhone and the iPad. And these cards are contextually relevant information to you as an individual at a particular time and in a particular place. So if I look at my tablet now and I look at the Now cards I have, I find out that Chelsea drew 1-1 with Maribor. A bit upsetting. Google stock price is down 1.48%, so that's the same as the market, not so bad. I can see nearby photo spots. The exchange rate between the pound and the Canadian dollar is 55 pence to a Canadian dollar. It's 41 minutes past 10 at home, and the weather forecast for tomorrow, funny enough, is rain. There's a recurring theme here somewhere, isn't there? Okay, but that's information that's relevant to me as an individual here at this point in time. And that's what's powering all of this stuff. And a lot of those contextually relevant pieces of information are based on your location. So you might see displayed in Google Now some cards like this. It could say, well, actually, if you regularly commute along a particular highway, I can tell you when the traffic conditions are worse than normal, and pop up a card and say, actually, you probably need to leave home a bit earlier this morning because it's going to take you longer to get to work. You haven't asked for this information explicitly, but because I know the journey that you normally make, and I know what the traffic conditions are normally like for that route, when we're not normal, I'm going to put up this card and give you that information. Same way, if you book a flight, it will pop up a card to say, okay, you can do online check-in now, or your flight's delayed, and so on and so forth. As I said, a lot of this is powered by your location. And my favourite card, one we've just introduced, is this one. This is the Where You Parked card. Now, how this works is that your phone has a number of sensors in it, an accelerometer and a GPS, which means that we can monitor your speed. So we can tell when you're driving, we can tell when you're walking, we can tell when you're cycling. So, if we see that you've been driving for half an hour or so, and then you stop, and then you start walking for an extended period of time, we've got a pretty good idea you've parked your car. And we can say, okay, where did they stop driving their car and start walking? Let's automatically put a pin at that point and say, that's where you parked your car. So that if you can't remember where you parked your car, we can tell you. We're behind the scenes, monitoring you. Now you could say, ooh, that's a bit creepy. But you know how it works. You're choosing to share this information. I think that's really useful. It's quite useful, quite clever. So it's that context that's going on behind the scenes of monitoring all the time. Okay, I'm going to finish off now with where I think the greatest kind of potential opportunity for us is as geographers, GIS people. A map of everything. At home, I have a Wi-Fi router. I actually have quite an extensive Wi-Fi infrastructure at home, 3 Wi-Fi routers, cabling, all sorts of stuff. When I put these slides together, and it was probably a year or so I put this slide together, I had 53 devices connected to my Wi-Fi network at home. Now, that might be extreme. I admit that, it might be a bit extreme. But if you think about it, you've probably got your smartphone, your laptop, you might have a printer, you might have a smart TV, you might even have a speaker attached to your Wi-Fi and so on. We are all going to get more and more devices connected to our Wi-Fi's at home and connected to devices all around us. It's called now the Internet of Things. And the idea is that basically anything that is electronic, could have a Wi-Fi chip added to it so you can connect to the network. You think, well, why might you want to do that? Well, initially, it's only kind of sad people like me that might do it. Because we get really excited by, in this case, connecting my Christmas tree lights to the internet. So, come the 1st of December, if you happen to be in Teddington, South West London, walking down my street, you will see the lights I have. These lights are connected to a switch that's connected to my Wi-Fi, that's connected to a server that is running a PHP script that is looking up what is sunset in my particular location, latitude and longitude, and switching on these Christmas tree lights at sunset every night. So for the period of December, that time changes by about 30 minutes. It gets late. Actually gets later and then starts getting earlier again. So these lights go on at a different time and they go off at about 11:30. Now, to be honest, most people wouldn't notice. I love it. I actually have a webcam that is watching these lights switching on and off at different times. Okay, I'm sad, whatever, get over it. But think about what's going on here. These devices are sensing their environment and they're reacting differently to what's going on in the environment. Okay, that's kind of a bit Heath Robinson. There are going to be around 75 billion devices connected to the internet by 2020. This is a figure that comes from Deloitte Consulting. And the device is going to be things like these. These are Nest sensors. So I have a Nest thermostat and I have 3 Nest smoke detector carbon monoxide sensors in my house. So, I can, again, look on to my device here and I can tell you at the moment at home the outside temperature is, come on, internet connection, don't give up on me now, just give me up on me, no, it's 4 degrees, it was a bit chilly outside, but inside it's 20 degrees, toasty. And because we've got good double glazing, the heating actually isn't on at this point in time. That's good, fantastic, saving a bit of money. And what's really clever about these devices, yes, I can interact with them across the web, but the devices themselves have proximity sensors in them. So they sense if there's anyone nearby. And they're all connected to each other in the house as a kind of micro network. And if between them they don't sense anybody in the house for about half an hour, they'll start switching the heating off. So, well, there's no one home, no point heating the house if there's nobody home. That's cool. Next cool thing is that over a period of time, the thermostat learns how long it takes to heat up my house. Each house will have its own thermal characteristics based on its age and the building materials and the efficiency of your central heating system. My home takes about 35 minutes to warm up from about 10 degrees to 21 degrees. So if it takes 35 minutes, it senses where my phone is. When my phone is 35 minutes from home, it switches the heating on. So when I'm coming home on the train, it's cool. It's been cool in the house all day, not been heating the house. The cats really don't like it, but the cats don't pay the bill. I pay the bill. Don't like it, but when I get about 35 minutes from home, the heating starts switching itself on. By the time I get home, it's nice and toasty. Lovely. Okay, I'm going to finish off with the poster child of the Internet of Things, the Internet fridge. Now, there's all sorts of discussions about the Internet fridge. They say, oh, you know, it's going to be terrible. Your fridge is going to be connected to the Internet. It's going to be calling out to the supermarket, ordering milk and beer and soft drinks and eggs, and you're going to have no control over it. It's like this fridge is going to take over your house. Well, that might happen, but actually what's more likely to happen is this. Here's a big fridge. This is my fridge at home. It's not connected to the Internet, but the next generation of fridges probably will be, and they will be connected to it to make them more energy efficient. When you build a fridge, when you design a fridge, it's designed based upon a principle that's gone back almost 100 years of refrigerated design. It says, okay, it's an insulated box that's refrigerated with the expectation that the box is going to be opened probably about 100 times a day. Because people are going to be coming in, getting milk, getting whatever. And it's designed to take that into account. So there's quite a lot of extra refrigeration built into the way a fridge works. But if you think about it, if you go out at 8 o'clock in the morning and you're not going to be home again till 4 o'clock, you shouldn't be using so much power to refrigerate when it knows the door's not going to open. So if your fridge knows where you are, because you've got all these proximity sensors and it knows where you are around, knows you're not going to be home for at least a few hours, it should be able to reduce its power consumption. The guys at Nest did the calculation. They said that probably an intelligent fridge like that sensed where its owners were could reduce its energy consumption by about 30% per year. Imagine every fridge in a city reducing its energy consumption by 30%. That is what a smart city is. And imagine all the other devices you might have interacting with each other, thinking, okay, I can power down now, don't need to do this, don't need to do that, or I need to add more here. There's a lot of intelligence that we can start to build into the infrastructure around us based upon us as humans being part of that infrastructure, interacting more intelligently than we currently do. And behind the scenes, all of that is built upon geography. It's building on the fact that knowing where things are relative to each other. The first law of geography, Tobler's first law of geography, things nearby are more relevant than things further away. Never has that been truer than in this idea of the Internet of Things and these maps of the future that actually, it won't be about maps of stuff, it will actually be stuff talking to each other, saying where it is. Okay, that's enough for me. It's late in the day. Thank you very much.